Good morning and welcome to episode 141 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. I am your host, Billy Bob, and I've got my co-host, Carlo Parcelli. He is streaming live from Washington, D.C., and I've got our special guest, Christopher Black. He is an international law expert, and he is streaming live from Campbellford, Canada.
That's right.
Today's episode was entitled "We're All Marxists Now," and that is a reference to a clip that I'm going to play for you shortly. And it's also kind of a play on words with Friedman's statement. Was that in the 90s? Maybe it was the 80s. We're all Keynesians now. But hopefully after we play this clip, it'll make a little bit more sense. There's an ideological struggle. There's the class struggle, and the primary battlefield that the class struggle is played out, especially in the West, is the ideological struggle, the battle over perceptions and people's understanding of what is going on. And really, there's two primary ideologies that battle for supremacy. There's a liberalism and there's socialism. And as a Marxist, we argue that liberalism is the ideology of the ownership class, and they want to proliferate that ideology. They want to indoctrinate everybody into that ideology because that ideology is not threatening to their oligarchic dictatorship, to their oligarchic form of rule. And as socialists, we understand that essentially under capitalism, under liberalism, in liberal democracies, it's the wealthy, the ownership class that controls the government, and the working class have been entirely politically disenfranchised. And so there's this struggle to get people to understand and wake up to this reality. And again, liberalism, it's anti-collectivist, anti-socialist, and it really just reinforces the status quo. And people are really beginning to wake up to the fact that the status quo is essentially oligarchic dictatorship. And that's really obvious for the last 40 years. So what this clip I wanted to play is about almost 3 minutes long. It's the Judge Napolitano, a lifelong libertarian, with his friend John Mearsheimer, who is a liberal, but he's the realist. He's the promoter of the realist school of geopolitics, the realist approach to understanding geopolitics, which is just liberalism. But so it's just interesting because I feel that they've made this huge concession in the ideological struggle. They're conceding that liberalism is not correct or true or okay, I'm going to share screen, and then we're going to discuss on the other side. But this is going to be about almost 3 minutes. But yeah, let's listen in.
Young Chinese influencer on TikTok who speaks English has made a fascinating clip directed at the American people. And the first time I saw it, I said to Chris, we got to play this for Professor Mearsheimer. We got to have his comments on it. So it's 1.5 minutes long, but it's in English and it's fascinating. And I want to discuss it with you after we watch it together. Chris, cut number 20.
They rob you blind and you thank them for it. That's a tragedy. That's a scam. That's why I'm saying this right now. Americans, you don't need a tariff. You need a revolution. For decades, your government and oligarchs ship your job to China, not for diplomacy, not for peace, but to exploit cheap laborers. And in the process, they hollowed out your middle class, crushed your working class, and told you to be proud while they sold your future for profit. And yes, China made money, but we used it to build roads, lift millions out of poverty, fund healthcare, raise living standard. We reinvested in our people. My family also benefited from it. What did your oligarchs do? They bought yachts, private jets, mansions with golf course driveways. They manipulate the market, dodge tax, and poured billions into endless wars. And you get stagnated wages, crippling healthcare costs, cheap dopamine, debt, and flagged wave property made in China, while they pick your pocket. For 40 years, both China and the United States benefit from the trade, the manufacturing, but only one of us use that wealth to build. This isn't China's fault. This is yours. You let this happen. You let the oligarchs fit your lies, while they made you fat, poor, and addicted. Now they blame China for mess they made. I don't think so. I don't think you need another tariff. You need to wake up. You need to take your country back. I think you need a revolution.
The one correction I would make, I realize a lot of this is ideological, is we haven't spent billions on useless wars. We've spent trillions on useless wars. But take it from there, Professor Mearsheimer.
Well, if you
If
listen,
that young man were your student in your class and he stood up and gave that minute and a half statement, how would you respond?
I would tell him I basically agree with him. I think he's correct.
Hey, that's all I need, right? Like, say Professor Mearsheimer has a Marxist student stand up in his class and spout Marxism and tell everybody that we're ruled by oligarchs who sell us out because, they don't give a fuck about us and they're only interested in furthering their own, political and economic interests. Mearsheimer would tell him he's right. So, I mean, to me, it's kind of a big deal when, you get these kinds of folks, these guys aren't young. They've been around, Napolitano is a lifelong libertarian. Mearsheimer's been a liberal for 80 something years. And they're gonna, agree that the Marxist perspective is entirely correct. I mean, to me, that's real interesting. And it's what I wanted to talk about at the beginning of our program today. So who would like to add? And I want to thank, we got some viewers. So Deborah Harris, Todd Doherty, good to see you guys. Thanks for watching. Who should I pick on anybody, or does somebody want to jump in?
I can jump in.
Go
Just
ahead, Chris.
the Chinese young man said, "Wake up." It's interesting because I just wrote a poem just called "Wake Up" about that exact same subject. Anyway, I'll send it to you later.
Yeah, post
it. Yeah, I can post it here. It's like a conversation. But anyway, about his remarks, he's described it very well. Mearsheimer has to agree because it's true. But what's his reaction? What would he do if he was president or leader of the United States? If he was leading the overall ruling party, would he change anything? As you say, he's a capitalist, he's a liberal, and he's stuck with it. He's not a Marxist, he's not a revolutionary. The United States needs a revolutionary leadership parties, and they do have incipient ones. You do, and you have many great people who are Marxists and who understand what's going on, including you, Billy Bob, Carlo, and many other people I've met in the United States. It's one of the great things about the United States, despite the fact I criticize it a lot, is that it's got some of the most courageous leftists in the world there, considering what you're facing. But what would Mearsheimer do? I don't think he or the judge, who's a libertarian, a capitalist, small government person who doesn't think the government should do anything for the people, that people should take care of themselves, I don't see how that would be overcome, because there is no organized force in the United States strong enough to mount a revolution or to engender a revolutionary feeling in the population at this point, because the propaganda has been so fierce the last 100 years, since the 1880s, and when socialism began being talked about widely throughout the world, Europe, United States, and Britain, Germany. The propaganda has been fierce, and any attempt at establishing socialist groups or parties has been suppressed. We remember Mr. Hill, who was executed, in Nevada, Nothing's changed since then. Sacco and Vanzetti, I mean, Rosa, Emma Goldman, and all these people, John Reed. You have great leftists, Marxists, communists who understand the situation, but what happens to them? Carla can jump in here because, Mearsheimer agrees that Marxism is correct, but I'll tell you a little story. I once went for a girlfriend I had, she was getting a PhD and she wanted me to go to a lecture on how PhDs can get actual work when she graduates. And one of the guys giving a talk about what his experience was, had a PhD in economics, and he said he was a Marxist, a communist, a Marxist. And he applied for a job advertised by Goldman Sachs, who was looking for an economist and analyst, and he applied, and they hired him instantly. And he's been working there for, I guess, 20 years at the point he gave the lecture, and he said the reason they hired him, despite the fact he was a Marxist, was because he was a Marxist, because they told him only Marxists understand how the capitalist economy really works. And we need someone like that as an analyst, because only you guys really know how it works. And that is so.
I actually have a good friend who was hired on the same basis by the government, by the U.S. government, to work in one of their departments because he was a Marxist economist who studied at one of the Ivy League schools. And I also have someone, maybe I shouldn't mention this, but someone in my in-laws' family who also currently works for a firm and has a very long and established resume as a leftist and a communist in this country, and he's been wooed by the intelligence community any number of times. So that's absolutely a fact. I think one of the things that's missing from some of the dialogue is the mostly hype, but the nuance of capitalism, and that is everybody has the potential for rising to the top if you have the right stuff, and then you can become immensely comfortable, and that creature comforts satisfy so much of what the psyche needs to exist. Now, some of us, where I really don't need that much. If I had the sufficiency to live on and not have to work, that would have been, just right. That would have been my choice, but it wasn't. So I had to work. But by the same token, if that option existed, where I didn't, where I had to work hard to gather all these toys, to these private planes and all these instruments, I would not make the effort to do it. Out of nature, I don't want to go up in a flying penis to the edge of the atmosphere or anything like that. It's not in me. It's not part of my DNA. But I don't ultimately I don't know how much I can add to this discussion about Marxism, because I'm still kind of on the fence at this late stage about how I feel about people establishing well-being. And I don't want to go off topic here, but I know the last time we had Dust Nettleton, Bukele came up, the subject of Bukele and El Salvador. And, I preface my remarks by saying, once again, I'm personalizing this, but that my son-in-law, who was a contractor, he passed away a few weeks ago. We miss him, but he had Salvadorans working on his crew. And one day I went over there, and they were all gathered in the basement where they had their tools, and they were shooting pool because they have a pool table down there, and drinking beer because the day was over. And they immediately, the Salvadorans asked me, "What do you think of Bukele?" Well, my remark was, Well, what do you think? Your families are down there. And they were all for the fact that now their families could walk the streets. They had I don't know this directly, but they had family members who had been harassed, probably worse, and that they were happy that their family members were safe. Well, Gus chimed in. He said, Bukele was an individual who was having poor people picked up off the street and arrested. Now, if you know a little bit about El Salvador during the 80s, you know that was another U.S. proxy war. The U.S. supported Reina and right-wing death squads in El Salvador who killed nuns, who killed Archbishop Romero, Dobison, and his henchmen killed Archbishop Romero while he was saying mass at the altar, for Christ's sake. And it was the Arena Party, and to go back to Bukele began his political career as a member of the major revolutionary group in El Salvador after they had signed a peace treaty. I think it was 1993. He was a member of the FMLN, which was the Farabundo Marti National Liberation Front, the largest guerrilla group fighting U.S. hegemony and the right wing in El Salvador. ELN was second, but FMLN was much larger, major party, and he was kicked out because he began to criticize other party members. And anybody who's watching today, if they have more information on that, they could chime right in, because I'd like to know what specifically he was kicked out for. But I suspect it's the kind of policy he's bringing forth now. And I know I'm getting far afield here, but I'd like to come back to that and discuss the connection. This is the connection. I'm going to do it now. Bukele's father was Palestinian. And Bukele, though he's born in El Salvador, has Palestinian patrimony. And now he's linked up with the U.S. government just at the time where there's a lot of interest, shall we say, in Gaza and Palestine. And so that might go to a long way to explaining some of these actions. They talk about Trump playing a 5-dimensional chess. Well, the guy can't even play checkers, but there are people around him that can play that game, and there may be a situation in which Bukele is getting a quid pro quo way beyond $1 million a month, which is trivial to house the prisoners that have already been sent there. Way beyond that, the quid pro quo may be much larger than we anticipate. In this way, this may be what that situation currently is all about. The one in which this kid Garcia, who's basically one of my neighbors, he'd been picked up in the parking lot not far from my house by the police before on trumped up, I can use the word trumped up charges, and there was nothing made of it. But there seems to be some sort of connection. I mean, why El Salvador? Why Bukele? I think somebody got to Bukele long before Trump began this new term, and has turned him around. Early on, and had all of this stuff plotted out. So what I want to ultimately to tie this back up is you have to be careful about capitalism and the deep state. Rosalie, my wife, keeps going, where's the deep state in all this? If they object to if they're at odds with Trump, where are they? And they're there. It's like one of our callers pointed in last week. USAID is operating full tilt boogie in Thailand, and Brian Berletic has pointed that out. So I think there are more facets to capitalism than Marx could have seen in whatever that cliche is, in heaven. What in whatever, I shouldn't say cliche, it's from Shakespeare, but from, whatever he could see, and he had no idea just how powerful and how nuanced the that way of operating was going to become. And
Yeah.
I don't.
Well, he did.
had to
Well,
get
he did.
that out.
Well, I think we're stuck. Right. It's the same with we have the example of Mario Vargas Llosa, who died this week, the great Peruvian writer. He is no doubt one of the great writers of the world. If you read his books, he has a great deep regard for humanity, and he was a member of a communist cell when he was younger in Peru, but later became conservative and criticized the left. He's one of these guys. This is the contradictions in capitalism when you have people who are attracted by socialism or say socialist Christianity or things like this, where you feel that society could be more just for working and poor people instead of the rich. And there are ways of doing that, and you get attracted by these programs. When they end up becoming fairly well off, they seem to change. Their circumstances change their thinking. Because as Marx said, circumstances create your psychology, your material circumstances, how you live, how you grow up, or your influences make your mind the way it thinks the way it does. Not the other way around. It doesn't come out of the word, like Plato would say. And the fact is that Marx recognized that since the dominant economic power is the capitalists, they control the media, they control the thought process, they control the education system, they control everything about how people are manipulated, how their minds are formed, and how they're trained, and how they're taught to see the world and understand their place in it. So it's very difficult to overcome it. And as Marx first proposed, he thought that the revolutions would take place in the the most advanced industrial nations like Britain and Germany. But it didn't. It happened in Russia because of the First World War and the circumstances that created, which created situations which otherwise wouldn't have existed, and permitted the socialists or the communists to take over there because there was no other solution for Russia's problems at that point. And yet, and they got a lot of support around the world, and you end up having the Chinese Communist Party being formed in the 1920s and getting support from the Soviets. And they still are operating, they're still successful. The Vietnamese, the Laotians, the Cubans, despite all the pressures, they're attacked constantly. So the capitalist world is terrified of losing this control. So they try to attack these countries in every way they can, and which is why NATO was formed in the first place, to drive the communists out of the Soviet Union and destroy the Soviet Union, which had a lot of influence in the liberation movements around the world and socialist movements around the world. And they succeeded eventually. They ended up getting inside the Russian party, people who were Western agents and who had a counter-revolution and overthrew the socialist regime. And it was a catastrophe, as even Putin says. He used to be a member of the Communist Party. Even he says now, as a capitalist, that it was a catastrophe. Everybody agrees on this because the living standards in what is now Russia collapsed precipitously. Millions died of hunger and starvation and disease. And it's only now coming back. And you have to give credit to Putin for doing that. But the Communist Party is still there in Russia, and it's still the second largest, maybe even the largest still single party in Russia. It's not gone away. That conflict still takes place. The struggle still takes place. And there's probably more of a chance to go back to socialism in Russia than there is in the United States. Because Russia is surrounded by all its main allies are communist states: China, Vietnam, Cuba, Venezuela, a semi-socialist state, Iran, a semi-socialist Islamic sort of form of socialist state, North Korea, very strong socialist state, Laos. You can think of others, certain communist states in India. But so the struggle goes on, but we're always faced with opportunist people who join. I mean, I was in the Communist Party a long time, and there was always people coming in who were attracted by it, but then dropped out. They were more intent on making money and furthering their careers and they're hoping to use the party as a way up. And people during a revolutionary process, like in Nicaragua, El Salvador, you had the same thing, a conflict between the left and the right constantly, and the U.S. interference in those civil wars. So many people would join what they thought was a movement going up and take power, and they could then benefit from that. So you get a lot of people attracted by that, not because they're devoted to the cause, but because they can benefit from the cause. And then when they take power and they don't like what's happening, they end up leaving or they start to attack it. Like Trotsky did this. So I don't think we should be too dismayed, but I mean, it is depressing that is a psychological factor, not in human nature, that people seem to want to benefit themselves more than help others. That seems to be just human psychology in some primitive way. Take care of their needs first, and hell with anybody else. Those that think we should take care of others first and not ourselves are a rarer animal, I think.
What you brought up initially, Chris, is what in my world we call the epistemology, or how you can know the world. And I'm always pointing out to people that you can only know the world from your experience of the world. And that's largely, but that experience can include reading, by the way, folks. Don't give up reading. But what my wife is always fond of pointing out are all of these communal cultures that existed around the world, generally smaller minority cultures, that did share everything, that do share everything, and operate at that level, which is something that's been completely lost in the Western capitalist cultures. So, whereas I want to just tag on.
I used to like. Sorry, I used to. People who watch Star Trek. I mean, the original series was, to me. I mean, people don't agree with me on this, but I always regarded it when I watched it. My friends, we always thought it was a very communist, socialist. We were surprised they put it on TV because it was quite clear they had a socialist society in the Star Trek world. There was no money. Nobody needed money because you could just get things produced. And if you wanted demand, you just had it. There was no power structure. It was a confederacy of democratic states and mini states, and everybody represented. And it was quite clear it was a form of socialism taken to its highest level, where everybody was treated equally and had equal rights and equal access to material things. And it was all about peace and the cooperation with other beings and all these humanistic things. It was amazing to watch a program like that, but they can't produce such a thing now. And the films later didn't really follow up on that idea too much, but it used to be reflected in the 50s when you had television. Began in the 1950s, where I'm old enough to remember watching it. Many people don't. But there are many programs which had that feeling and that tone because they had many communist writers still writing in the United States for TV scripts, film scripts. They were very, very different than they are now until the McCarthy repression and the blacklist. The film scripts, the TV scripts were very, very left-wing socialists and presented these viewpoints in very effective ways. But you don't have that now. It's all gone. Well, not all gone. I mean, there are some independent film producers that do these things, but there was a general trend at that time. That general trend is gone. It's now all about game shows and survival shows, and it's all about capitalism, how you survive in capitalism, and you have to be a hero or you're a loser, you know, and losers are condemned. Trump is an exemplar of that. You know, he thinks he's a big guy because he's rich, and everybody else are losers, like he said about those soldiers, or purported to have said about the soldiers when he visited the graves in Normandy or somewhere. Those poor suckers.
Mhm.
They were just those dead guys, just poor suckers because they got killed. This is how these people think. He wouldn't have been a sucker. He would have been one of the big capitalist arms manufacturers. That's what he would have done. But the poor guys that got fought the war are suckers. That's how he thinks. That's how capitalists think. And yet, the proof of the living of Marxism and how communism has what it can do for the world is China. I mean, people criticize China and they've always been attacking it's really capitalist now. We deserted Marxism a long time ago. And it did in a way, but we don't know. I mean, if you ask Marx, what would a Marxist society look like? He would say, I don't know, because we've never had one. I'm just saying to you that if the working class can take care of the power, take control of the means of production, instead of having the capitalists in control of it, we don't know what the working class would do with those means of production, but that's up to them because then they have power instead of the capitalist class. But what they would do with it, I don't know. And we see what the Chinese have done with it. The working class takes care of the Communist Party, and they now, in the last 40 years, have allowed what Lenin even allowed in 1920s, the new economic program. They allowed capitalism to come back in some ways. Because there's nothing wrong with making money and nothing wrong with people having cafes, opening little shops and opening business. Nothing wrong with that, as long as the working class controls what goes on, what decisions are made, and how the working class and people are treated. That's the important thing. So the Chinese have had this balance where the Communist Party allows capitalists to exist and to operate, but under their control. And they still have half the industry is state-owned and has a mix. But the Communist Party is always watching, in control of how capitalists operate and work and how they treat people in China. And so China has now created one of the best economies, best societies in the world. Not the capitalists. The United States is the ultimate capitalist state, and we see all the problems it has. And it can't solve them. It's the capitalist United States have no ability to solve the problems like in Appalachia from the hurricane. And if they repaired anything, can they do anything for those people? We see disaster. There's no disaster relief. When in China, they go in with whole teams and house people and build things. Anyway, going on. So
You have counterexamples. I just briefly, Billy Bob. You have Puerto Rico now.
oh yeah.
That big storm. And they privatized the grid.
Yeah.
They forced them to privatize the Puerto Rican grid with this company that has the outages constantly.
Yeah, they blacked out this week too. Yeah.
Right, they blacked out this week.
Yeah.
So, whereas when it was semi-U.S. government control, it was a much better grid. I hate to keep going back to this, but anybody that knows anything about business knows that if you have a middleman come in, things are more expensive. If you have your government building your weaponry, like the Russians generally have right now, you're going to get much more and much better weaponry than if you have the corporations where every CEO has to have a 227-foot yacht. Period. Billy Bob.
Yeah, no, you guys both made a lot of really great points. Too many, in fact, because there's no way I'm going to be able to touch on each of them. I know Carlo brought up Bukele. I had a few thoughts about that. I mean, it's interesting that his father is Palestinian. That's interesting. I'm not sure what relevance that has, but I also didn't know that he was part of the Communist Party.
Away,
what's that?
His father's passed away.
Okay.
He died in 2000.
Was it this current Bukele or his father that was the member of the Communist Party in El Salvador?
This current Bukele was a member of the FMLN, which is the Farabundo Marti National Liberation Front.
If they kicked him out for criticizing other party members, it's probably because he was a Western agent, right? He was probably a Western agent, just like, and he probably serves the same purpose as Gorbachev and Yeltsin in Russia. They'll infiltrate the party and then they'll make reforms and do the imperialist bidding. But yet it's still probably an improvement over what would have happened without him, right? Because he is definitely cleaning up the streets. He's cracking down on the cartels, on the drug dealers, of the gangs within his country. But again, all those things were put in place by the capitalists to begin with, to cause chaos and make sure that a socialist government, a real socialist government, like you have in Venezuela, like you have in Nicaragua, couldn't take place. So, but he's definitely wants to maintain good relationship with the imperialists. And I've heard from libertarians, the crypto bros, these kinds of people call El Salvador the new Mecca. So you have tons of expats moving to El Salvador, and they're saying it's a great thing. I want to say that El Salvador has either Bitcoin is an official currency there or something, but they take crypto. You can pay for everything over there with cryptocurrency, and the libertarians just love it. It seems that it's very similar to kind of what they want to do in Argentina with that anarcho-capitalist in charge there. But ultimately, it's not it's a system that has extreme limitations. It can never do what socialism could do. But it's and again, China is showing that you don't have to to rise, to prosper, to have a peaceful society. You don't have to engage in imperialism. You don't have to steal other people's resources. You don't have to overthrow other governments. You can do it peacefully. And okay, what else?
Well, I just going back to that, Mishheimer, on that Judge Napolitano's show, you sent another clip, a message, in which Mearsheimer said he was surprised. He disagreed with Zabisky. What's his name? The Polish guy. I forgot his name.
Brzezinski,
yeah, that guy. Who thought that China could rise peacefully. Mearsheimer said, I always thought that China could not rise peacefully. Well, why would he? And he never said why he thought so. Why would he assume that China would have to be like the United States? Because he's an American and he's lived in this milieu, his milieu, all his life. And that's how he sees imperial or large countries, not imperial, because China's not an imperial society. But that's how he assumes that if you're a big country, you're going to become aggressive and violent. Well, China's proved that that's exactly what you don't need to do. And it was struck me that he still thinks that. He still thinks that China cannot keep rising and not be aggressive. Well, if the United States makes war on China, you can bet your boots China's going to hit back hard. You expect that.
Yeah.
But I don't understand his thinking at all. Why he would say such a thing. But this is the typical. He's still imbued with capitalist ideas. He can't get over the fact that he's been taught somehow, like Colonel McGregor and all these guys on the Judge's Show. The communists are always bad, evil, and Stalin was Satan. I mean, they're imbued with this. They taught this from the time they were kids, and they believe it.
But it's a total contradiction. I mean, they contradict themselves, and that's really my point. Because they are vindicating and they're affirming the truth of the socialist worldview, the socialist perspective, while at the same time they remain committed liberals and anti-socialists.
Right.
And it's just interesting to me, but I think people ought to be able to take a look at the competing ideologies and see the one that Mearsheimer and the Judge embrace and realize that that's nonsensical. They're embracing something that they are, this liberalism that they agree over the last 40 years has been anything but liberal. It's been completely illiberal. Yeah. And again, that proves the socialist commentary that liberalism is a front. It's the facade. It's the branding. It's how they sell oligarchy to the masses by pretending that they're committed to things like freedom, individual freedom, the right, individual rights, these kinds of things, when in reality, individual rights and individual freedom like are subordinate to the interests of the oligarchs.
Right.
And so in no way is liberalism liberal, because ultimately liberalism is the ideology of the oligarchs, and it's going to be subordinate to the economic and political interests of the oligarchy. And so essentially that is simply dictatorship. That's bourgeois dictatorship. That's oligarchy. And that's what they're agreeing has happened over the last 40 years, that these oligarchs have had total power and they've been stealing and exploiting the working class for their own benefit for 40 years. Meanwhile, the socialist country has been building things and improving the lives of the working class. And so, again, if we're going to have an ideological competition, these two have proven, with their statements, which ideology we ought to be embracing and pursuing. Carlo, go ahead, sir.
I just wanted to say that I don't think Mearsheimer could envision BRICS, for example. And I think it has a lot to do. Development had everything to do when I was coming up with the IMF and the World Bank. And that if you want to discuss world development after World War II, you had to talk about Bretton Woods, and there was no other path for development. But what I wanted to say was, what's interesting to me about these guys that appear regularly on Politiano, not all of them, not Max Blumenthal, of course, not Aaron Mate, but the other guys, like a lot of the military guys, they're racists and they're sexist. And that goes hand in hand with this notion of capitalism, because if anything that held back racism, for example, I mean, this notion of purging Jackie Robinson's war record from the Defense Department. Give me a break. That's just pure spite, pure. And I'll amend I won't get too deeply into it, because what it indicates to me is when these collapses happen, which is happening right now in the U.S., it's going to collapse right. And that deserves a lot of discussion, why it's collapsing right, and why so conveniently and so easily collapsing right. I mean, there's one more dimension to this situation in El Salvador, is that the School of the Americas, which is now called WINSEC, on the world, Western Hemisphere. So I can't. Anyway, they're training ICE as we speak. They're training the people that are going down and hauling people out of their homes and their businesses and beating up people at the Rio Grande. They're being trained in Fort Benning, Georgia, which has changed its name to the Fort Moore. That's right. It's now called Fort Moore. So the same people are still doing.
It's gone back to Benning just a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they say it's a different. They say it's a different Benning. It's not the general Benning. They're doing that game.
Well, hard to keep up with these guys.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We got them running scared that they had to change the name from School of Americas, but that it's falling right. It's falling right. It's falling right very fast.
Yeah.
Don't you think? I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think, and then why is it falling right? Because that's been since the Soviet Union. I've seen this since the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. Many people got depressed on the left because of that, including me. That was a real blow to the socialist movement around the world, no doubt about it. And a lot of people lost faith, abandoned the idea, and went over to the enemy. And the Western press said, you see, socialism failed. That was the whole propaganda. You see, socialism doesn't work. Look what happened to the USSR. And that's the message that's been thrown at working class young people ever since. Socialism doesn't work. China's a dictatorship. North Korea's a dictatorship, blah, 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 blah. You got no real freedom. And by that, they mean freedom to move capital around, not what we can think of as freedom. And so the propaganda has been building, and it's been harsh and constant. Left-wing parties have been marginalized, and sometimes through their own mistake, like in France, when they went into the government in that sort of tainted them. In Italy as well. They should never have done that. But still, what used to be strong communist parties in Europe and respected ones in the United States and Canada, well, they're still there. But most people are taught to look, socialism doesn't work. So what's their solution? Their solution is to go to the right, to look for populists like Trump or like Mussolini or Hitler. We're all claimed to be for the people. And, you know, the Nazi Party was even had the name socialist in its name. Mussolini was a member of a socialist cell, but he worked for MI6. So there is no choice that the young people see. They don't see a left choice, especially in the United States. Propaganda there is so intense. You can't even say anything left, and they misidentify the left. So the left liberals are called left, Democrats are called left by the Republicans. Although to a communist, they're just part of the right-wing faction which rules the United States. Just a bit kinder in their way of dealing with people. That's it. Yes, moving to the right because the left has been suppressed, and the idea of the left has been, they've tried to suppress it, and they've been very successful at doing that. And that's why it's important you have your show to try and counter this. But in the mass media and the mass market of ideas, that's what the idea is. There is no left. Left doesn't give you a choice. It's only capitalism and ways of adjusting capitalism to help people, you know.
Yeah. That's the point I wanted to make. You know, Carlo talked about breaking left or breaking right. You know, the collapse is breaking towards the right, and of course, there's truth to that. But what you really have is a ruling establishment wanting balance, right? And so they have their controlled opposition. And I'm in the city that I am in. Over the weekend, Bernie Sanders and AOC had a huge rally. And you know, they're the gatekeepers. They're the left opposition, supposed opposition. They're the controlled opposition that is there to keep Trump in check, right? And to pretend that people have a viable alternative. And if only we voted harder, things could get better. But it's just such a lie. It's a joke because the political system is totally controlled and dominated by money. And I believe they control the outcomes of the elections. You know, they know how to get the outcomes that they want. And so when Bernie ran, they had a million ways to subvert that election. And he was cheated by the Democrats, by his own party in multiple primaries, not just once, but multiple times. And so, you know, it's an oligarchy. It's not a liberal democracy. Liberal democracy simply means oligarchy because it doesn't even matter how we vote or how we engage in their electoral process. They control the electoral process to such an extent that they get to dictate who wins and who loses. And so, I don't know if it's breaking right. Obviously, Trump is doing a lot of right-wing, illiberal things, and you have, you know, AOC and Bernie having their grand tour of America, pretending to be opposition to that, but they're really not doing anything. Okay, thoughts, Carla? Go ahead.
Yeah, but look at the U.S. government. What Musk is doing to the U.S. government, is making the U.S. government look like socialists. The flavor of U.S. government now is socialist, and that's been done by basically the people behind Trump. There's the notion that you would give anybody anything is now anathema to half of America. That you would have a Department of Education that might actually educate people. I mean, it got to the point where on one of our shows, one of our callers protested that I was supporting the CIA. Well, in a certain sense, I guess I was, because they're part of that socialist
project,
hinge, whatever you want to call it. So now somebody dived in and they pointed out to Brian Berletic, as pointed out that the USAID was still alive and well and functioning in Thailand, and all over the world actually. So that's not going anywhere. Neither is the military going anywhere, which gets its budget increased all the time.
$1 trillion military budget is what they're going to be after.
Yeah, you're right. Because the fact that the present regime in government in the United States, Trump people, well, Biden did this too, but they're exaggerating it by claiming that the Democrats are all Marxists, communists, and stuff.
You have to excuse me.
Okay.
I have to take a break. I'm sorry.
Hey, no worries.
Back in a bit.
I'm back.
Okay.
Yeah. So he accuses them. Everybody is appointed by the Democrats in the government being Marxists and communists. It's quite clear that they still fear communism and socialism. So they use it as a label to get their way against their own capitalist opponents, a different faction. They call them communists, which is supposed to discredit them with the people because that's being described as being evil or stupid, or even worse, stupid. You know? So he even accused when he attacked Canada, up here in Canada was still angry with Trump. He even accused Canadians of being communist. Why would he accuse a capitalist country of Canada of being communist? Why? I guess because we have free universal health care. And to him, that's communism. The fact that it's good for people is irrelevant. In fact, it's relevant actually to him because he doesn't want that to exist, because that means that's an example of what the American people, working class, could have as well. We don't want that example existing. That's why we have to get rid of the Soviet Union. That's why it's illegal to go to Cuba, because you might go there and see what can be done. This is why you're not allowed to go to North Korea. You're in a prison. You're not allowed to go to countries unless the American government lets you. So why don't they want people to go to those places? Not because they're dangerous, but because they're dangerous to them, because people will say, oh my God, you go there and see what those people, the socialists, have done for people there, and come back and start talking. They're in trouble. So they're still afraid of it. And they use it unfairly and to smear their opponents, no matter who they are, and end up people believing it. People believe that the Democratic Party is left, and it's nowhere near the left spectrum of the political spectrum. It's nowhere near it. It's on the far right. In Canada, we would consider the Democratic Party a conservative party, and the Republicans we would consider outright fascists, basically, because they're just a pure form of dominance by capitalism. And there is no large semi-socialist party in the United States. You don't have a third party. We have the New Democratic Party, a Social Democratic Party, which used to be much more left, but it's still sort of left, far more left than your Democratic Party. They just gave us free dental care. You can't even dream of that there because you don't have. So that's why they fear it, and that's why they attack it. And Judge Napolitano is one of these guys, these libertarians who propagate on YouTube. There's thousands of channels with these people talking about, we want small government. Why? The government is, they say the government's the enemy. The government's not the enemy. It's who controls the machine. The government's just a machine. Whoever controls the machinery of government is important, not the machine itself. And they don't want people being given anything by the government, which the controlling people who control the machinery of government. They don't want them to give them the working class anything. And this is why he's a libertarian. He doesn't want average American citizens to have anything. And what is socialism except the people getting together and agreeing to help everybody else? He doesn't want that. They want, you got to survive. I survived on my own. I got ahead on my own. You got to do the same thing, and anything else is bullshit. They don't want. This is why I don't like. I mean, the judge has some interesting things on. He asks interesting questions about foreign policy. It's an interesting show often, but their basic attitude is very right wing and anti-left and anti-people, anti-working class.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I would argue that liberalism. That's what liberalism is, big L liberalism, which manifests itself as the Republican voters, as the Democratic voters, as libertarians, as paleo-conservatives. I mean, there's a whole broad spectrum of ideas that fall under the big L framework of liberalism. but ultimately it represents what Marx described as, a government that represents the ownership class. And the ownership class does have divisions, and you have parts of the ownership class, like you said, that want a kindler, gentler approach, that they want to give some money to welfare, right? And they want to not be so extreme in their exploitation of the workers. Maybe the workers overseas, but not our own imperial, the workers of the imperial core, because we don't want them to get angry. We have to placate them. But then you have another wing of the oligarchs that say, "Oh, we're gonna take what we can, and the working class will suffer what they must." Right. And right now, there's no checks really on anything. There's no political power that can oppose, the dominant faction of the oligarchs, which is realizing that China is a tremendous threat to their interests, and that we have to engage in a huge shift in our talking points, in our ideology, to justify some changes that have to be made in order to, defeat our rival and maintain their own obscene share of wealth, power, and privilege throughout the rest of the 21st century. I mean, that's really what is going on, and it's. I mean, we're at a very interesting point in history where huge changes are taking place, and we're watching it, we're commenting on it. But there's been since capitalism, overtook feudalism, there's been this ideological struggle, between what's best for the working class, who are the majority people, right? So what's best for us? Democracy, truth. Like we want to all be informed. We want to know what's going on so that we can best identify our own collective interest and what kind of system is going to most benefit the working class masses. But that kind of thinking is anathema to the ownership class. And the ownership class often has economic and political interests that are in the exact opposite of the working class majority. So this is the primary contradiction of capitalism. And we can see that, the class struggle has been lost in the West. It's been lost, tremendously lost. The working class is defeated. The ownership class has been preeminent. Like they've dominated the political economy, especially since World War II. And I mean, it's interesting. Like, who is that planner, the Cold War planner? George Kennan really did lay out, the Cold War and how we have to stop behaving liberally, that we have to engage the world in straight power principles of economic war and violence. And so they've really made the world safe for themselves. And that was their whole effort, is to make the world safe for their oligarchy, so they're not threatened by things like democracy, by the ideology of socialism and other powers, showing the threat of the good example, the threat of, hey, if you guys did things like this, life would be way better for most of you. So they don't want, the American people to see that. So they went to work throughout the entirety of the Cold War, subverting and undermining other societies to make sure that they could never, result in the threat of the good example. But now, guess what? They fucked up with China. They fucked up, and that gets me back to, somebody said the capitalist will sell me the noose that we're gonna, use on them. And that's absolutely true, because they couldn't help themselves but exploit China. And China was smart. China made the decision to allow themselves to be exploited because, like the guy in the video at the beginning was saying, it was a win-win for both. China took all that investment, all that access to our market and to our technology, and they really used it to improve their society and benefit the lives of the working people. Because that's what socialism is. That's what communism is. Ultimately, it's all about how do you change things and improve things to benefit the working class. And capitalism is absolutely different. It's how do you, what kind of system best benefits those with capital, right? How do we make the world safe for those with all the capital? How do we make the world better for those with capital? Like you were saying, Chris, like, you know, they want freedom for capital. They want the freedom to move their capital anywhere they want. That's what is in their best. Is that good for workers? Not really.
Right. And we're in a situation. Oh, sorry, Carlo, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that Billy Bob's quote of Noam Chomsky, the threat of a good example, has a lot of application here, because on the one hand, you have ideology. On the other hand, you have substance. And what we're faced with now is how easy it is to manipulate substance in this country, whereas ideology, the way at least it used to function, is ceasing to function, was plurality. Now, you used to have a plurality of beliefs, and that's what made democracy what it is. And we're quickly moving away from that rapidly, and we're getting the substance. So to get people to complain, to the average person, to be kind of crude about it, to stop following the MAGA route, is to raise the price of eggs. Well, that's not going to be effectual. It's to have all the comedians and late night television rag on the Trump family or make jokes about Republican congressmen. That's not gonna change anything. None of it's serious, and there's no ideological core, like Billy Bob is essentially saying, I think, that people can grasp onto, that would see that looks to the betterment of everyone, and to the detriment of no one. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, we don't have people like, you're talking about comedians, but you don't have people like Bill Hicks anymore.
No, but
I mean, he was brilliant. He was, but I was thinking about, as you were talking about what they're doing in your country, this expulsion of illegal immigrants or migrants. Why are they doing that?
Even legal.
When they, I mean, okay, they're not legal, but why are they doing it now? Why are they, when they allowed them to come in, they brought them in and they've been using them on a mass scale for cheap labor with no rights, basically slave labor. They get maybe something better than where they came from, but their lives aren't that great. But why are they expelling them now? Because they lose cheap labor. I mean, if Trump really wants to use tariffs to force industry to come back to the United States to manufacture, he's got one big problem. He doesn't have a cheap labor force like you do in China and Vietnam and other places in Eastern Europe, Thailand. They don't have it here in your country. Even though the wages aren't as high as they should be, they're not as low as they are there. So how is he going to do this without a cheap labor force? And now he's expelling the cheap labor force. Why? Seems to me that they're almost fascistic. Maybe they are. We can argue about that. But instead of picking on the Jews because they support Israel, they're using they're generating hatred among the population to support them by fixating on illegals. And they've got to be expelled. They've got to be dealt. They're a danger to the society. How he's going to handle this contradiction of expelling the cheap labor force and then bringing back industry which needs a cheap labor force, I do not know. It seems crazy to me what they're doing, but the tariffs also will add costs to the working class. They're going to cut all these obviously they're trying to cut all the social benefits that exist, which will force people to, that's what they're going to lower wages in the United States. That seems to me what they're going to try and do. They're going to lower the value of the dollar, which lowers wages. They're going to try and raise prices so people are forced to work for and pay for everything. They're going to have to pay for everything. They won't have pensions. They won't have. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make it so that workers in the United States will work for anything, even the 10 cents an hour, because they got nothing else. And that's how we can afford to expel the illegal working force. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to me. So I think there's a beginning of an attack on a huge attack on the working class in the United States is going to take place.
Well, I don't think they're going to be able to. I don't think they're really trying to expel the. I think they talk about it and they use immigration as a political football between the two wings of the oligarchy. But I don't think. I think they know better than to mass deport them. I don't think they're going to mass deport them. But I was pointing out that they're also deporting legal residents, people who are here legally just for supporting the Palestinian cause.
Yeah.
So to me, the immigration thing and the I'm going to bring manufacturing back thing, these are political talking points to play to a base, but they're not serious. I think what they're really serious about is they're going to be serious about crashing the global economy and trying to, hurt China that way. So Brian Berletic, we like to talk about him. He's given two examples. It's like you're giving the world chemotherapy. It's making the world really sick. The entire global economy is going to get very, very sick in the hopes that, we target the cancer of China and weaken it sufficiently so it's no longer a threat to us, even though we're going to make the entire world sick. And also his other analogy was two battleships, and the United States is prepared to ram its battleship into the Chinese battleship, critically harming our own battleship, but sinking that battleship to the ocean floor. And we'll have critical repairs that we'll need, but we'll be able to limp back to port very slowly. So these are the two kinds of analogies that how Brian explains the macro analysis of what's going on. It's what Mearsheimer calls the security competition, an escalating security competition. And that just means that we see China as a rival. And so we're going to do everything in our power to destroy them.
Well, that's what they did with the Japanese. Look where they're led. That's exactly what they did to the Japanese empire in the 1930s and 40s. When the Japanese began becoming a big regional power, and the Japanese were actually favoring decolonization of Indochina and all these places, Indonesia and all these places. And they did, and they were welcomed when they went in there by the Southeast Asians. Many of them welcomed the Japanese because they got rid of the Europeans or the Americans in the Philippines and so on. But the United States started that war to destroy Japan because Japan was the rising Eastern economy at that point. China was a mess. It was occupied by half of Japanese troops. So, and look where that led. That led to a very, very horrible, terrible war, which most of the American casualties were in that war. And it led to Japan becoming defeated and a vassal, but they're not going to succeed that way with China. They can't. Because Japan didn't have oil supplies, and they knew they could only last that war for a couple of years, and then it would be over if they didn't win it. Because they had no resources. China has resources, and it has Russia behind its back and North. So if there's a war, which if that's what they want to do, and it looks like that is what they want to do, then you're going to have a major war, and the United States will be defeated. And then what will happen internally in the United States is, well, we might have to look towards what happened inside Russia when they were defeated by Japan in 1905. There was a revolution. And then 1917, when Russia was defeated by the Germans, there was a real revolution. So if the United States goes to war with China and is defeated, which I think they will be, then, or even Iran, if they go to war with Iran and they're defeated, I mean, the ramifications of what we're going on inside internally in the United States are quite vast.
So, I mean, I don't know about a hot war with China, right? So I think the United States is, if there was a hot war, nuclear weapons would be a risk, and then the entire, all of humanity would be at risk. But I think the United States believes that they can simply weaken China by implementing an economic embargo. And so they will interdict, shipping and the import-export energy imports and good exports coming out and going to China. And they're thinking that if they do that for a few months, China's economy will collapse. And I think they hope and they think they can do that without having to take nuclear weapons, a nuclear strike from China, and without having to strike China nuclear. But
well, that's what the Americans did with Japan. I mean, they blockaded the oil supply to Japan. That's why Japan finally struck and attacked, because they had no choice. The American government blockaded them. They had no oil supply. They had 6 months supply left, I think, when they decided they had to attack.
No, that's
not going to work. It's not going to win China.
And the blockade was on behalf of the British.
That's right.
It wasn't even in direct U.S. interest.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Anyway, but it's interesting. I'm always optimistic, in the sense that the bomb will not be used again, and so don't listen to me, please, because I'm wrong about everything. But I feel like last time we brought up the fact that that the bomb might be used, but I brought up maybe the lame fact that, well, China and India have never gone to war, and they've had, nuclear war, and they've had contentions. Pakistan and India have contention. They've never taken it to nuclear strikes. So maybe it's geography. I don't know, but maybe I'm always hopeful that the bomb will not be used. I studied, a friend of mine and I took a year out to take a look at the bomb when there was that spate of books that came out. What was that? The Making of the Atomic Bomb. Gee, I can't remember the author's name. Based on that, looking through his references, and we both came to the conclusion that the reason that the bomb was used in World War II was because to deter the Soviet Union from further
I agree
aggression
with that.
as it's perceived, and secondly, it was racist in the sense that it could be used against the yellow people, but it couldn't be used primarily against the Germans, though the Los Alamos didn't have the bomb in time. The Germans surrendered. Heisenberg was a terrible experimentalist. He botched the whole thing. I like to think on purpose. One day he almost blew up himself and Weizsäcker, his main aides, with an experiment with one of their piles. They barely made it out the door. So I like to think there was something going on in the back of Heisenberg's mind. Look, I don't want to be involved in this, but anyway, that I'm optimistic that the bomb won't come into play, no matter what the hostile
if we're
situation.
going to talk about nuclear weapons, that brings up Iran. So we're just seeing a roller coaster, right, of rhetoric with regards to Iran, and it seemed likely, and I know Scott Ritter was pulling his hair out, believing that the United States was getting ready to use state-of-the-art, brand new designed bunker buster nuclear bombs against the very deep nuclear program that's been embedded into deep inside Iranian mountains where normal conventional weapons would not be able to reach. So it seems that on this roller coaster ride, most recent thing is that everybody's reporting. The New York Times, I think, reported that Netanyahu brought an attack plan for Trump, and Trump rejected that attack plan, which again is good news in favor of these diplomatic meetings. And so we had the first meeting in Oman last week, Saturday. Tomorrow is going to be the second meeting, I think, in Rome, I believe. Someone said it was going to be in Oman again, so I'm not sure if the venue has changed. But, what are you guys' thoughts on that? Like, do you think that they're going to be able to come to an agreement, or if they don't come to an agreement, is Iran or is the United States, Trump, or Israel going to attack and plunge the region into war? Is it a 50-50 bet, or what do you think, Chris?
Well, I think the whole thing about the nuclear program is a pretext. The Americans know that the Iranians aren't developing nuclear weapons. They're only developing it for civilian programs. And they came to an agreement, Trump's agreement, well, Obama and Trump at the JCPOA, the agreement they had with Iran restricted Iran to only developing it for civilian purposes and basically surrendered Iranian sovereignty because they were allowing inspectors to come in and tell them what to do and this and that. It was shameful, really. But the Americans, I mean, it's like saying, when are you going to stop beating your wife? That's the sort of thing the Iranians face. Well, we don't have nuclear weapons. Well, you might have them, or you might be trying to build them. Well, we're telling you we're not. And we can never satisfy you. So you want a new, you pulled out of that agreement. Trump pulled out of that agreement. Now you want another agreement. Saying what? The same thing. Well, now they're saying, no, we want you to have no nuclear program at all. Well, you can't do that because we need nuclear power to generate electricity and stuff. Why? And by the way, why can't we have nuclear weapons when Israel and you have nuclear weapons? Why is it we can't have them? What is that? I don't see that being said by anybody, obviously, but it should be. They should say that every time they talk. How come you got them? We can't. Anyway, we don't want them. So what is the United States doing with this game of insisting that they pressure Iran not to have what they don't have and don't want to have? It's just an excuse to cripple and to take apart Iran and take over its oil resources. They've never given up the attempt since the 1979 revolution, when they overthrew the Shah and they lost control of the Iranian oil. The British and the Americans lost control of the Iranian oil supplies. They've always wanted it back. And that is their main purpose. They want to control the entire oil supply of the world. That's why they would like to take Russia too. But Iran supplies a lot of oil to China. That's what they wanted. They want to cut off the oil supply to China. That's, I think, the real reason. It's not, and nuclear weapons is just a pretext for an attack. If Iran doesn't agree to do what they're not doing, not to do what they're not doing, and even if they do agree not to do what they're not doing, that'll never be enough, and they'll keep going and they'll keep pushing and pushing until they see it's a time they can attack. But I agree with you. I think it would be dangerous at this point because now Iran has China and Russia backing it up, and China is not going to let the oil supply be cut off. I mean, that would ruin their economy.
Well, they're trying. The United States is trying to. So they've declared secondary sanctions on any country buying Iranian oil.
Right.
I doubt China will back down and say, okay, we're going to stop buying Iranian oil because we don't want secondary sanctions. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think, this is all part of an escalation of the global chemotherapy that's going to be very bad for the global economy. And, and it's all being pushed and driven to hurt China. And it's not going to work. Of course, it's not going to work. But so you're exactly right. I mean, the U.S. interest in West Asia is to control it, dominate it. And if they can't have a proxy government in charge of Iranian oil, selling it to us at pennies on the dollar, we want to turn it into Libya. We want to turn it into a failed state that has no power and can't resist what Israel is doing, can't support Hezbollah, can't support Hamas, can't support Yemen. And so that's ultimately what the West is after, for sure. But the question is, has Trump seen the limitations of his own power? And is he thinking that, the best thing he can do is come to some kind of an agreement with Iran, because any alternative is going to be worse. Alternative of doing nothing, Iran just gets stronger. They increase their trade with, Russia and China. They're a member of the BRICS, and they just become economically stronger. Or can we, try and influence them through carrots instead of sticks, and try and get some influence by ending our sanctions and working with them ourselves, to make, give our chance the best, give the region the best chance to, benefit Western imperialism, really. But Yeah, I don't know. I mean, can Trump see the futility in bombing Iran? I am not sure, and I'm thinking that
I don't
he
know.
might see utility in it. There might be utility in bombing Iran, and that utility again is causing the kind of global economic pain that they believe can hurt China more than it hurts the United States.
Yeah, you might be right. I'm hoping that they have seen the light and realize that the Iranian military power is very strong, and
Yeah.
Israel and they're going to be hit hard, both Israel and the United States, if they try it. But they may still be willing to try it if they think the consequences for them at the end are beneficial. That is cutting off oil to China. They may be willing to take losses.
Yeah.
To severe losses to have that result. I hope I'm wrong there, but that may be it. And in which case we don't know. And now we got Marco Rubio saying that yesterday, I think in Europe, that the Russians aren't coming to an agreement with us quick enough. So you know what? To hell with them. We're going to give up this peace process. They got no patience. Are you telling me you after a couple of weeks you got bored? You don't want to go on talking to the Russians because it's not happening quick enough. They got like a short attention span. Or what does it mean? And then what? And Trump says we'll walk away next week. If it's not done next week, we're going to walk away. What does that mean? They're going to totally pull out of Ukraine, which means the Russians have pushed their main opponent out of the battlefield. There's a big defeat for the United States. Or they're going to ramp up support for Ukraine. And I suspect people think, well, they may just pull out and they don't want this war, and they'll take the loss of face, and the Russians will be victorious because the Ukrainians will collapse because the Europeans can't really support them very long. So Russia's won this war. Or are they going to ramp up and go the other way? And I suspect the logic dictates that they will go the other way. That's what they've been talking
Or, well, they could just push their European vassals
to do more. Yeah. Right. And help them behind the scenes, send them stuff surreptitiously. Yeah, you're right. It could be like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just crazy. But they're very dangerous, these people. You don't know what they're going to do.
There's always the CIA black budget. But to go back to Iran, you've got you've got a number of people talking, saying different things. I think I've remembered, or someone suggested, what the difference was between the pact that Bolton and Pompeo talked Trump into abrogating is different from the one they want now. But I agree with Chris. It's not a real substance, and that has to do with the grade of uranium being processed by the Iranians, and that it would have to be a lower grade, not so close to weapons grade uranium. And I think if Iran were to agree to that, of course the U.S. would find some other subterfuge to bring on board. There are several other topics about Iran that I found kind of interesting. This is one. There was a gentleman on who worked in the first Trump administration and was fairly familiar with Trump, and he's basically said what I was saying about Trump's personality a year ago, and that is Trump doesn't like blood. But Trump is not a warmonger like Hillary Clinton. He's not a Hillary Clinton. He's not out there, you know. And I tend to agree with that still. And the reason I would agree with that to a certain degree was as I believe that Netanyahu, the last time he was out, fully expected to be able to talk Trump into attacking Iran. And Trump apparently, according to the scuttlebutt here, was the one who stepped in ultimately and said, no, we're not going to do it. You can't do it. We're not going to do it, and you can't do it. Meaning Israel can't do it. So just to toss that out, there is that going around.
Well, I don't think it's because he's sorry.
Well, did you say somebody stepped in and put a stop to it? Who stepped in and put a stop to it, according to the scuttlebutt?
Trump.
Oh, Trump was the one. But yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
who
somebody
stopped
in the
the Israelis?
Pentagon
Yeah.
must be telling him. So I'm just curious, who in the Pentagon, because you wouldn't think Hegseth would be the one to stop things. I mean, he's just such a fascist himself, and he's a pro-Israel firster, and he hates Iran. So I would be surprised to hear him to be a voice of reason. But maybe there's people in the Pentagon that are telling him, because he's just a
That
lieutenant
was
colonel.
part of it. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, because the Israeli attack, when the attack was repulsed, the last time the Israelis attacked Iran, they didn't finish that mission because they couldn't get into Iran. And they know, so the Pentagon probably knows that an attack would be very difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. But I don't see Trump as being a man of peace. He says, he complained about Ukraine, there's so many people dying. But meanwhile, he's bombing the people in Yemen. He supports the attacks in Gaza. He's threatening to invade Canada and Panama and Denmark, which will be wars and people will be killed. I mean, the idea that he's a man of peace or he cares about people I don't agree with that. He only cares about the danger that they may lose an attack. That's what. And so in Iran, they may lose, they may get hit, they may not be able to succeed. The same, and that's what he's afraid of in Ukraine. They're being defeated in Ukraine, so he's saying, "Oh, it's too many people dying, and I don't like it." Too many. But that's not what it is. Well, it's about the fact that the United States is being defeated in Ukraine, and they want to get out of that, extricate themselves, and try and save some sort of face. And the Russians are saying, "Well, you can agree to this, like we've always said, and you have peace." But they don't want to agree to those things, obviously.
No, there's no doubt he's cruel.
Yeah.
Oops, excuse me. There's no doubt he's a cruel person.
Yeah.
And he's surrounded by very cruel people. I mean, who will do anything. But I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. It's just
He's got a losing hand. He doesn't have any winning hand with Iran, with Russia, or with China. And so I think that the oligarchs are just very happy to have him in place, and they're going to try and push him into doing something big, like a great reset, kind of, a global economic crisis that just wipes everything out, and they can start again. And they're happy to have him because they can blame him. The West in general, the oligarchs, they're gonna be able to project what they know needs to happen, but it's going to be bad for everyone except for themselves, because it's going to set themselves up, with a chance to maintain their preeminence. But they're happy to have Trump, and they're going to push him real hard to do something really stupid, like attack Iran, like try and embargo China, like tell his proxy in Taiwan or the Philippines to, do something very provocative against China. But
well, in fact, they have actually embargoed China. I mean, now, as the Chinese foreign minister, Commerce Minister said, in fact, all trade now in the United States and China is blocked.
Except for the exceptions, the exemptions.
True, but the Chinese are not going to sell. They're not going to ship. They've said there's now no American products going to be sold in China at all because the price has gone up too high because of our tariffs on you. So all trade, and then the trade is now up to 245%. Trade is basically cut off, except for some, and you're not going to get rare earth minerals. They've now stopped. They've ordered the Chinese airlines not to buy Boeing planes anymore. They canceled their orders. I mean, it's severe. It's happening quite rapidly. So I don't know. But I don't see. You have Bernie Sanders and there's demonstrations in the United States taking place, but in the Democratic Party leadership, I don't see, following the news from here, I don't see any big pushback against these policies from the Democrat deep state
Oh, of
people.
course, I totally agree.
I agree with you. I think they've stepped aside and allowed him to come in and try and see if he can solve the problem. Otherwise, they're waiting in the wings to come back again and blame him for his failure. So yeah,
exactly. They want him. They're pushing him in a corner where he's going to have to either do something drastic or take a big L. And they're banking that Trump will do something drastic rather than take a big L. And then, yes, you're going to have the Democratic oligarchy waiting in the wings to pick up the pieces and say, "Oh, look how evil Trump was. Look at all the pain Trump caused everyone. Yeah. Boy, that Trump, he sure is bad."
Yeah,
but they're letting it happen right now, and they want it to happen, and they want Trump to do it. and they're going to put him in a position where he's going to have to do it, or he's going to, look really, really like he lost, and he doesn't want to do that. Somebody brought up black budgets, and that made me think of something on different topic, kind of. But so when I was thinking about the black budget, I was thinking about the class struggle, the class war, and the class consciousness that the oligarchs have. The oligarchs are very class conscious, at least the think tanks and the ruling establishment. They understand that the working class is a threat to their oligarchy. And so they actively, constantly are engaged in activities to undermine that threat and to weaken that threat. So one of the principles that Marx didn't fully appreciate was that it was in the poorest, most impoverished, and most backward societies where revolution is most likely, like people that have the least to lose. And Marx underestimated the ability of the capitalists to provide the working class with just enough to keep them from being revolutionary. Oh. Now, how does that play out in the United States, and what does that have to do with black budgets? So, it's just a thought I had recently. And so in the United States, the government feared those communities that were the most impoverished, most exploited, and had the least amount to lose. This was true throughout the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s, which was basically, you could call it the inner city, the black community, who were the most impoverished. And so there's a bunch of great leaders started, coming from that community in the form of the Black Panthers, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. And so there was a direct assault against this threat against oligarchy, not only through the assassination of all these leaders, but also through the flooding of these communities with drugs. And this is where the black budget comes in. So the United States was working in Central and South America and Asia, the Golden Triangle there, and they were benefiting off of importing drugs into the inner city, exploiting these people, getting them hooked on these substances. And then and how does that help you? Well, that keeps this community from ever having a chance to organize, get its shit together, and become a political force that could threaten the status quo. And so flooding that community with drugs was one way to do it. The mass incarceration that resulted that was another way to do it. The assassination was another way. And I would also say pop culture, shoving, the most ridiculous kinds of messaging down the throats of those people, such as, certain aspects of the gangster rap. And that's kind of old 90s stuff, but it's just anything but fucking socialism, right? Just give them anything to keep their minds occupied with, getting rich or die trying, that kind of a message, and nothing about, community. Of course there's always the exceptions to the rule. And there's a lot of great artists. I think Tupac was pretty good with his, he had a history of socialism in his family. And also, who's that guy? He's a commentator now. He's a great on the Palestinian issue. I see him on Danny Haifong and other shows. And he's a British artist, though. Anyway, so there's always exceptions. But that was just a thought I had recently about how the oligarchs are keenly aware of Marxism, and they have a keen grasp of the class struggle. And they're always actively doing things to keep the working class from doing what we need to do. And again, what we need to do, and I'm glad Mearsheimer and I'm glad the judge are in agreement that we need to have a revolution throughout the oligarchs and put in place a government who's interested in, serving the people, the majority, serving the working class. Now, Trump gives lip service to that, but it's a fucking joke. It's a lie. And we don't have agreement. There is not clear across the board agreement what it would look like for a government to put the interests of the working class first. There's a lot of different ideas, but ultimately we can figure that out, but we definitely do not have a government that is the interests, the economic or political interests of the working class do not enter into the equation whatsoever with the current government in place. And so everybody, even freaking confused liberals, can understand and appreciate that what we need to do is get them out of the way and put in a party that that really genuinely wants to do better things for the American people. And if you get that, I mean, I want to say, even if they're not explicitly socialist, it's still going to be an improvement over what we have. Like, even a government that is ineptly trying to benefit the working class is going to be even better than a government that really doesn't give a fuck and is solely concerned in benefiting the other class, the ownership class. All right, that was a lot that I had to say. I'm so sorry.
I think while you were talking, the Warren Beatty's last film, Bulworth, came to my mind because it was one of the great American films promoting socialism. And it was the last thing he ever did because he was banned out. He was kicked out of Hollywood, banned really from making films after that point. He never made another film after that. And it's about a U.S. senator who's corrupt, bribed by the insurance companies to keep private health care going. And he has an epiphany one night. I forget how that occurs, but he has an epiphany. He realizes he's been living a lie and that socialism is the only way forward for the people. He suddenly changed. One of these angel things happens. And he ends up, there's one scene in there where he's wandering through, he ends up lost in a black ghetto somewhere in Chicago, and he ends up being kidnapped or hijacked, I don't know, somehow meeting up with these black gang guys, and they're all selling, what the leader of this gang is selling cocaine, and he does rap, and it's all this, like you say, gangster rap, which is all about putting down black people and attacking black women and misogynistic stuff and degrading them, basically. It's not blues, blues is always about how blacks feel and their struggle through life and how to deal. Blues is something. Rap is is an antithesis of that. In most cases, though Tupac and Dr. Dre, some of these guys had some, Snoop Dogg had some good stuff at the beginning, but then it changed. But anyway, he says to this guy, why do you think you're so great? He said, I'm a gang. I got this gang. I got 100 guys working for me. We do this. We shoot anybody, blah, blah. He says, but what are you doing for your people? What do you mean? I'm helping me. You're a very intelligent man. It's quite clear. And you have a command of the language and you have a command of people. Obviously, people follow you. Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you like Malcolm X or Huey Newton? Why are you allowing them to degrade you and attack your own people and fight with your own people when you should be fighting the man? This is what's this white guy telling me this? Well, I'm telling you, you seem to have forgotten your own history. It's a very interesting scene in that. I mean, he ends up being assassinated too. I mean, Warren Beatty's character.
That was a scene from the movie Bulworth?
Bulworth, yeah. Bulworth, you have to see Bulworth.
It takes me back to Moscow when I was standing outside this building watching this crowd gather, and they were discussing. It was several Russians discussing with a Burkina Faso student the fate of Burkina Faso, because Thomas Sankara had just been assassinated not too long before I was there, and Burkina a kind Russian saw that I had no Russian. So he came up, he said, would you like me to translate? I said, sure. And the Burkina Faso student was holding his ground. We have to continue on with Sankara's work. We have to continue on. Whereas the Russians were they were charmed by the new Gorbachev Yeltsin regime.
Yeah.
And now you have Traore, and it's come full circle.
Yeah.
And there's hope, and I just wanted to point that out.
Russia. There's hope with Russia.
Putin there is talking about the most important element of society are the workers. I mean, he's not. I don't think he's going back to some sort of social. But they obviously have a mixed economy. They've renationalized some industries. They haven't fully privatized all housing yet and things like this. So it's a mix there as well. I don't have the hope of it going back to what it used to be, but there is some hope for improvement there. But
Yeah,
you
the
don't even get
Communist
that
Party-
here. You don't get that here. I mean, how can they instantly within a couple of years revamp their entire economy to survive these sanctions and this war, except that they're using the old Soviet system, the Soviet models, economic models. So we were going back to that and using some of the same structures because that's worked and they know how to do it. But
Well, they
maybe
definitely have a socialized weapons manufacturing,
yeah, they
you
do.
know, a military industrial complex. You know, they've increased their trade considerably with socialist China. And Putin, back, you know, when he came on the scene in 2000, he nationalized the natural gas and oil sectors, which had been privatized under Yeltsin, and he renationalized them, and that really did stabilize the economy. He wrote his doctoral thesis on doing exactly that,
Right.
and then it's been extremely beneficial. So in effect, his planned economy is not too dissimilar from China's planned economy. You know, it's a mixed economy. You have some state-owned, some of the larger industries, more important industries are still state-owned, and then you allow markets. You know, you allow capitalism, you know, within the framework of your overall system. But
Right.
yeah,
you would think that the American capitalist elite would realize the success that these people are having because their capitalists still get rich in these systems if they want to, and yet the people are given enough benefits they're not going to attack you. They're going to be satisfied and content. Why the Americans can't? Well, the American and British, Canadian elites can't see that, or capitalists. I don't understand why they don't see the benefit of moving that way. But
Well,
no, that's
my
what
understanding is-
Go ahead, Carlo.
I'm going to say, he took his oligarchs aside and said, look, if you want to work for the benefit of all Russians, including yourselves, you can enrich yourselves, but
Right.
work for the benefit of all Russians. You can stay. If you're not going to, leave.
Get out. Yeah.
And some left and some stayed.
That's right.
So that's all I wanted
So
to add.
we end up on a certain optimistic note that there is hope for even capitalists to realize that you got to give the people something, or else there'll be trouble.
And you know,
Well,
I don't think we need to you know, ideologically condemn those governments and societies that are not explicitly socialist or communist. You know, if they're interested in peace and mutual prosperity, and they're going to resist being tools of the empire, like, you know, they're our allies. They're our allies.
Yeah.
but
And
you have to include imperialism in the equation, because that's the way the United States came up. Imperialism, naked imperialism,
True.
slavery, Native Americans,
Mexico.
all kinds of.
They came up, and they're currently still very, very strong, and they are not going to just concede their you know, their privilege. And so exactly how they work to, you know, maintain it remains to be seen. And we're speculating every week. We're coming on and speculating. Ultimately, they are in decline, and they have no cards to play. And the question is, are they gonna, you know, how much pain are they gonna bring while they you know, continue in their decline? I mean, it's like, you know, they created this game board, and now they're just throwing the game board, ripping up all the pieces because they see that they can't win. And so how do things end up is very interesting to speculate about. So you guys have done great. We're an hour and 44 minutes in. Thank you so much for joining me. I was very happy to put out all these ideas that I've been thinking about, and I love having this platform and talking with you guys and engaging with you guys. We're definitely going to do it again. Any last words before we wrap up for next week? Go ahead, Carlo.
This is just trivial, But when Leo brought up, well, the German director, he couldn't remember the name, Leo Herzog. I listed a group of movies, but I left off Casper Hauser, which may have been
yeah. That's good.
Herzog's best movie with
Yes.
Bruno S. What a marvelous film!
Right. Oh, I wanted to tell you, Carlo, I'm not sure you saw my message, but I watched your recitation of part of one of your long epic poems. It was very dramatic. And the poem, it reminded me a lot, it was very much in the vein of William Blake and his poem, long poem, Jerusalem. I thought it was, I'm not sure I understood entirely what you were saying in it, but what I did get, it was very dramatic and very, very provocative. And it was very well done. And it was like Jerusalem, which I read. I not understand Blake all the time, but there's deep, profound thoughts in there. So I liked it.
Well, that's very high praise. Very.
Yeah, no,
Which
it
one was it?
Oh, you were going on about monsters and things coming out of the dark and where are we going. It was, you said it was a section of a long poem you have. But you went on, it was like 5 or 10 minutes. This recitation is on Facebook. I saw it.
He's
So,
done several monologues.
Yeah, I just this one, the first one I've seen. Yeah. I thought I had to watch it, so it was great.
Yeah.
Now, Chris, you said you did a poem recently. Did you?
Yeah, I just posted it there. I just posted on your message in the private chat here. It's following up that Chinese fellow's called "Wake Up." This is also called "Wake Up," and it's a discussion with the protests. Protesters are protesting, and then the passerby comes by and says something, and they have this debate. It's very short.
Have you posted it to your Facebook wall?
I did. I can post it again, but it's here if you want. If you can pick it up there, but I can post it to Facebook again.
Well, not everybody has access to our private chat, so I just want the viewers to go ahead and check your wall on Facebook and give that a read.
Yeah, I'll post it and see if anybody reacts to it. So maybe not one of my best ones.
You've got one guaranteed like, even if it all goes over my head, I will definitely.
All
right, guys. Thank you so much. We will see you next week.
Thank you.
All right. See you. Thank you.